Horror, the genre designed to piss pants and cause nightmare in children with the main stick to keep you tense and scared throughout. Something that the Five Nights at Freddy film, or FNAF for short, didn't get the memo on. Now, the FNAF film is the long-awaited theatrical entry into this mascot horror franchise, coming out in 2023, 9 years after the original game. It was my first horror experience outside of analysis and summary videos, but since then, I've played and watched many more horror media, and the more I do, the more that this film just frustrates me, all because of the atrocious pacing issues destroying the film's terror. As I said at the start, I believe horror needs to keep you tense throughout the majority of the film. Like when you think of films like Smile and Child's Play, where you know the protagonist will be fine for the most part, they can still craft the tension that they can be picked off at any point. Something that technically the FNAF film does have for around 30 minutes at the start, however 20 of which is just set up before the protagonist Mike even gets to the titular restaurant. And it's mainly due to the fact that the heavily advertised killer animatronics of this film that take inspiration from the games don't actually try to kill anyone until they kill 4 random characters vandalizing the restaurant about halfway through the film. They were just suddenly reminded themselves that this is a horror film and these animatronics are meant to be scary, only for all of this threat and terror to be dissipated with the scene that ruins the film for me, being them tickling Mike's younger sister and building forts with him. This is all done in the sense of they're all having fun, but in terms of the rest of the film, especially as they try and kidnap Mike's sister later on, and try and turn her into an animatronic. They could have done that here quite easily, but instead they're just building forts with her and having fun until they're deciding to get serious, I guess. What's worse is the contraption that they eventually stick Mike in later on in the film reminds me so much of Saw and its franchise, and I know it can be goofy at some points, but it's like in the first film, that terrifying moment of just a guy with cancer standing up as someone is locked in the bathroom to die from starvation. Imagine if instead he just unbuckled him, they both sat down and had a cup of tea and laughed like they were at a comedy club or something. That's how I see this scene. It ruins any threat and terror these abominable machines are meant to have. One of the main defences I've heard are the games are jump scare games and aren't about gory kills. So, to be fair, before complaining, I decided to check the games out, and only play the first one, as that is what the film is based upon. Now, I played it, and I really didn't like it, but in a good way. I was constantly on edge and stressed throughout it all, constantly trying to look around so when one thing didn't start working or my power would become low, my heart rate would increase and I'd start to panic, which is what the game would want you to do. But even knowing on the first night that it's virtually impossible to get a game over, I was still worried because I didn't want to get jump scared, as they're my least favourite form of scaring, because it's the one that works the best, which, isn't great for a jump scare franchise, but the only threat in the films that they seem to have is the scene that's immediately dissipated by the fort, as I mentioned earlier, but also only become threatening right at the end again, and they find really easy ways to work around this, whereas in the games you're frantically trying to cheat track of them, so you can close the door without using excess energy, yet in the films they actively just flip switches and make them all have parties, and like I say, building a fort with all the lights on. And realistically, that should have drained the power and made them all sitting ducks compared to these killing machines. And to be honest, I think CinemaSins put its best, that the opening scene is the most amount of Five Nights at Freddy's you're gonna get from this film with the same name. Now, if you like this film, great, I'm glad you enjoyed it. But from the advertisement, the fear I had of the games growing up, and the honestly really good acting, I expected more from this film. And just because it's adapted from jump scare games doesn't mean that the lack of threat and murder from these killer animatronics is justified in my eyes. I just don't feel scared of them. I see them as a sort of slightly creepier looking Muppet, which is really disappointing. At least for me.